Okay, we are here for a work session to discuss purchasing policy for the county. I think most of us kind of agreed at the last meeting that there was at least items to discuss on if and can we purchase more locally. And I think the first thing that we need to do before we get into a lot of other possibilities is just to maybe ask Bob to explain what our present policy is and whether it's, you know, in what form it is and what we've pretty much been going by.
Yeah, we, and our policy has been a rather long-standing policy. It's been in effect for, and I honestly don't know how long, without looking back at our ordinance's history, but our purchasing policy for local vendor preference is very general, and it's very general by design. Thought I had it here, but I'll get it in a second. But the history of our purchasing policy is that it was put into place quite a while ago, but it does not really get into applying percentages or point systems or anything like that in the way that we purchase. In fact, our purchasing policy cites right now that local vendors will be given a preference when the level of goods and services offered by a local vendor are consistent with what's being offered by other vendors, and as long as the difference is negligible, and that's our criteria. It's my feeling that the policy that we have has worked very well. And when we get into talking about some of the other jurisdictions and their purchasing policies as it relates to local vendors, I think you'll begin to see that a general policy is a better policy to have than one that cites a bunch of procedures. Wentzville has a point system, for example, that's pretty cumbersome, I'll say. Some other jurisdictions use percentages to a dollar limitation, but then, as I've said publicly a number of times here now, the percentages that you apply in a local vendor preference really have to be taken into consideration with the type of commodity that you're buying, because different commodities offer different value to the local economy in the portion of that transaction that actually winds up residing in your local economy in the end. So I think all that points to the fact that a general policy like the one that we have is best, and the reason why is because it can be applied on a case-by-case basis depending upon the commodity that you're buying, the price difference that actually exists between a local vendor and a non-local vendor, and then making the best decision at that point that's in the best interest of the taxpayers of this county. My coined phrase at this point is that local vendor preference equates to making a conscious decision to pay more than you can elsewhere for a product, and that's true. The intent of local vendor preference is to try to help, obviously, the local economy when you can, but local vendor preference can't be looked at as an entitlement, and if it's used in too broad a basis, you wind up in a situation where local vendor preference actually becomes that, where local vendors, if you broaden the scope and you start opening the gate for more local vendor participation by jumping your percentages up or using a universal percentage that applies, you build almost an expectancy by the local vendors that, well, I've got this much more in a percentage to work with. That entitlement really can work against you then, because as your use of local vendor preference grows, I think there's a direct correlation between its effect on competition as a whole. As you grow local vendor preference, you're going to decrease the extent of competition and the degree of competition you see in your bids. You know, we saw what competition does in the marketplace, or recently here with our voting equipment. And just the element of competition saved us $200,000. The attitude of competition is a good one. Kurt, I think you were talking about something we just bid here recently that the vendor, because they thought somebody else was bidding.
I do not know the exact dollar amounts, but we currently have a ShoreTel plan in place for the maintenance on our phone system. And Mr. Wong had come to us and said, hey, is this something that needs to be bid out? And I asked the question, can other people bid on it? And he said, yes. I said, there's our answer. This needs to be bid out. And the current provider was AT&T on this ShoreTel system. And we got a response back from AT&T, which was lower than what we are currently paying.
Under the expectancy of competition. So that's the thing here. There are benefits of using local vendor preference when you can and do it responsibly. But I really want to caution everybody to the broadening part and opening the door. I think we've used it on a very responsible basis historically. At the last council meeting, we had 9 vehicle bids that were being looked at. Of those 9, 5 were approved at that first meeting. 2 of the trucks were tabled, and I think we've established now actually that the company does have a local vendor preference. So those, I'll see what you all want to do about those tonight. But 5 of the 9, essentially, the council agreed with our recommendations in the use of local vendor preference in some of those, and not on others. And so I think our track record is generally very good with that. But I just want to caution against opening the gate too wide here to where you get pinned to rules of your own policy without having a way to get out of it, or subjecting the taxpayers to an inordinately high price premium that you're paying for buying locally.
Let me ask one question before I turn it over to. Explain what you said, about sometimes that the money that if you use a local vendor, sometimes the money really doesn't stay local. Can you give me an example of that?
Yeah, if you're, and I really don't remember a local vendor preference scenario that we've talked with around here other than vehicles. We may have had 1 or 2 construction contracts, but it largely centers on vehicles. And vehicles are a very low gross margin type of commodity. So because of that, when a car purchase is made from a local dealer, dealers make most of their money on parts and labor and
warranty service.
Warranty service. So very little of that car purchase actually stays here. We heard from one of the successful bidders that was approved last time. It was on the Chargers, where she called up and was talking with our fleet manager, Steve McPherson, and was talking about another bid that they didn't get. And she said, I don't know how Mach-Ins can price things the way they do. She said, when I sent my price into you, and this was on one of the other bids that she was not successful on, she said, I had $150 profit in each of those cars. And Mach-Ins was $180 less than her on the price of that vehicle. She said, I'd be losing $30 a vehicle if I tried to match Mach-Ins' price. So the $150 is what I'm driving at, is that the profit margin on vehicles is certainly less than $1,000 a vehicle, from what I've been told, and I know quite a few people in the industry, and a lot of times it's less than that. So when you're talking about making the conscious decision then to pay $400, $500, $600, $700, $800 more a vehicle for an average run-of-the-mill vehicle, I think you're going beyond where you're being useful to the taxpayers and in the use of their money when you're buying a day in, day out commodity like a vehicle. So Cars, I think, are the prime example. And when you're talking about a low gross margin type of commodity, you need to be talking about a very small, close tolerance type of guideline. If you get into higher gross margin things that are going to generate more benefit to the local economy, then a construction project would be a good example. If you had a couple of $1 million highway contract that came in $15,000, $20,000 higher locally than the low bidder, and this is a contract where a construction crew is going to be working in the local economy, largely local guys working around here for a year or two on a highway project, you might want to consider that. But in the end, there are going to be some limitations in that realm, because if you're using federal dollars or state grant dollars, a lot of times you cannot do anything but utilize the low bidder. So in that arena, you're sometimes going to be restricted just by the terms of the grant as to having to take low bid. But it's just a matter of looking at really what the end result of the commodity is to the local economy, and I think that's the thing that local vendor preference should be about, and I think that's what our policy really does, is it leaves you the ability to gauge each case on a case-by-case basis.
I had this discussion previously with Mr. Gross in his office one time about this, and we looked at vehicle bids. This was back, and it was, I believe, another Mockins bid. It was Putman versus Mockins situation. And I remember this distinctly. Mr. Gross had in his office a little dry erase board with a curtain over it. And he said, well, how much do you think we should be paying more to keep that business locally? And I said, I never really thought it that way, Chuck, but I said, and he said, well, make a guess. So I made a guess, and he had a figure set in his mind too, and he had it behind that curtain. He pulled the curtain back, and it was a couple points, okay? And then, I see a lot of entities in the county pushing, like this is from the EDC. I sent this to y'all, and I printed a copy. The importance of shopping locally in St. Charles County. 60% of our revenue for county government comes from sales tax. And I think it's a little hypocritical if we're telling our citizens to buy locally, and then we're buying our vehicles out of town for a couple points difference. And I think sometimes this stuff can be cleared up real simply. When I did the illustration from the last meeting on the dump trucks, one of the reasons I kind of cried foul on that is they were 1.3% and 1.5% for the local vendor. Well, Mr. Spalding from the Highway Department contacted council office, and I really appreciate that he did. And he wanted to say, hey, the Troy, Illinois low bidder on the dump truck has a facility in St. Peters with service bays and repair people and regular facility. So I think that one's off the table real clearly. But I still think that we have to consider this, and I think it's important, and that's why a lot of other cities have brought it up. I did have forwarded and printed copies. We have not only St. Charles County's program, we also have St. Charles, Winsfills, and St. Peters that you have before you. And I'm sure I've looked at all of them, and Winsfills is pretty complicated. St. Peters is maybe a little vague, but City of St. Charles has got a pretty different one. And I'm sure Mr. Klinghammer knows more about that one than I do, and I'd kind of like to hear your comments on how that worked in St. Charles.
Sure. I'd be happy to espouse a little bit on it. I helped write it, so what we looked at on it was that we certainly wanted to encourage St. Charles vendors whenever we could. And Bob, you were talking a lot about how much gross margin there is for the ultimate vendor. We took a little different approach. We didn't really care if they were making a little bit on each car or not. To us, to have that contract with the local dealership was something that we viewed as important. But we also didn't want to spend. We agreed with what your analysis too, that a flat percentage doesn't work. It has to be capped at a certain amount, or the $1 million contracts. Obviously, just a couple points on those, and you're talking some real money real fast. So we looked at it and said, well, we're gonna give a local vendor preference, but we also want to limit how much more we're willing to spend. Because it is going to cost more, and that's that's where we came up with the $5,000 cap on it. So it doesn't really come into play a whole lot, but then we did find more and more times that it was, not just on cars, but on some copper fittings and all kinds of things that the water division uses on a day in and day out basis. And it seemed to work well for us, but we could tell people that we are following our own practices. We are encouraging the people to vote, to buy locally. But on the other side, we weren't willing to say whatever it costs, we're going to buy more either. So it was an exercise in trying to find that balance point in there. Most of the time on the big contracts, though, it came down to price and best. On the big engineering contracts and when we're hiring professional services, the local vendor, we could say we had it, but very seldom did it really come into play because we were basing the decision on what product or what service best met the needs that we were trying to do at that time anyway. We didn't always, a lot of times we didn't go with the lowest one. And similar to tonight's consent agenda, where there's at least one case on there where we're not going with the lowest one. We're going with a St. Louis vendor instead of somebody I think out of California or some other out of state. I think it's important to have a policy though that states exactly what our viewpoint is and have it so that it's not as arbitrary as being able to look at it and say, well, we're going to apply it this way this time and do something different with it the next time. So I'd be a proponent of having a stated policy, whatever it is, so people could pick it up and look at it and understand and know exactly how it's going to be applied. The current policy, I think, if I was a vendor and I picked it up and read it, it doesn't really say how it's actually going to be used. It has a lot of flexibility to it, which is good, but it doesn't really accomplish the political goal of giving that warm and fuzzy feeling to our vendors, saying, yeah, we value you for being in St. Charles County, and we're gonna buy from you whenever we can.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear you say it that way, because when you get right down to it, if you want to put all the bull aside here, local vendor preference really is political.
Absolutely.
And it's the use of it's politics on one hand versus principle on the other. The county residents whose dollars we're spending are expecting us to spend their dollars as wisely and as prudently as possible. When local vendor preference comes into play, it's a political tool, and it's just what it is. So, that's a balance that's tricky, and depending upon the amount of subjectivity that's in your process, you were talking about the kind of judgment call that we make right now in using local vendor preference. That's true, but our whole purchasing system is largely subjective because we say the lowest and best.
Right.
So that's part of our mantra for everything that we buy, and not just confined to what local vendor preference cases we have out there. It's really everything we buy, that everything is local, is lowest and best. When you were talking about the service contracts, for example, a lot of those we'll put out as RFQs, where we solicit qualifications and judge the merits of a successful company that we're going to award to based on their qualifications, and then start talking price with them after you look at their qualifications first. So not all the service contracts that we put out are an RFP where we're actually getting a bid. A lot of them are on a qualifications basis.
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't know if political is the word I would use. I think it's more of a leadership issue. Okay, if we're going to tell our citizens it's good for the community to spend locally, I think we should do the same thing. The other thing is a year or so ago when I had this discussion with Mr. Gross, I brought up some of the other cities, and he indicated that they wanted the flexibility in county purchasing. they didn't really want to be shoeboxed into a 3% or a 5% like you see some cities. They want some flexibility. And I didn't go anywhere with it because I thought, well, I understand why you needed that flexibility. So even if we decide not to write a rigid boxed-in type of a local vendor preference ordinance, could we at least discuss the percentage we're willing to spend, and maybe give, if Mr. Elman's administration will work with us, give a directive to these guys what percentage we'd consider? For instance, if the 2% number that we were using in the past, could that be changed to 3%?
You could recommend, but the charter prohibits you from giving that direction.
Okay.
You have, if you want to give
Could we
policy
come to a
direction, you
mutual
have to
agreement?
do it in an ordinance.
Okay.
Yeah, we can. In fact, I remember the first time after this came up, and I was concerned the first time we sent one out that wasn't the lowest bid, and I thought the reaction would be just the opposite. And I was pleased when, a couple people came up to me afterward and said, I think that's fair. I think that's fair to go ahead and give it to the local person. So just that kind of feedback, is, I think, important in this process. Just a couple points, Mr. Chairman. The one that's on tonight, Bob, that other bid was unresponsive, wasn't it? The low bid from California.
I'm not sure which one that was.
The one that Mr. Klinghammer was referring
It's for
to.
the county, it's for the election authority.
There's 2 bids.
It doesn't say that it was unresponsive, it just says,
It's,
There was something,
I know the one you're talking about.
You're talking about
It's from
the,
Mr.
Unresponsive was
But
all of
it was for the election authority, and the
One
concern.
had 2 bids, I think
That-
the other one only had 1.
The equipment for the election.
that's not the one I'm talking about. The one that we're talking about was actually for printing.
right, it's the printing
Right.
of the voter cards, I think, yeah. And we paid a little bit higher, but it was the question of using a company in Maryland Heights, I think it's Maryland Heights.
that's right, it was the accessibility of.
Right, as opposed to dealing with a company in California for a very negligible amount of
Input
money.
technology.
You don't want to set yourself up for failure in dealing 2/3 across the country with a printing job. So, we made a decision that we did not want.
I just remember there was a reason
Yes.
that I approved that it could.
Right.
And we're running.
Lance? One more time.
Let's see. One of the things concerned me is St. Louis County has no preference at all.
Right.
And I didn't want to get into a war here where, we raise ours, they raise theirs. But it's my understanding that most of our people over here don't bid over there. That most of the bidding goes in the other direction, which is also great for our folks out here, because I think your $1,000 is way high. I think the margin on these cars is very, very small. I don't know if it's true or not, but I've been told by a dealer that there's people over there selling them for less, trying to, some predatory pricing going on, trying to run people out of the business. The interesting thing about that is they're losing money over there. The people out here still make the money because we take them there to be serviced.
Right.
So, for whatever that's worth, that's just the information I have to add to this. I asked the same dealer what he thought was fair, and he said 2 to 3%. I asked him what other people are doing, what he thought was fair. He said 2 to 3%. Now, the thing that I do think we need to talk about, though, is the absolute number, because that tends to be rather arbitrary. You got somebody, if we're bidding for 4 dump trucks. Somebody doesn't qualify because they're over $1,000.
Right.
But if we divided that up into 2 bids for 2 dump trucks, or 4 bids for 1 dump truck, it comes down to how you bid it, not how not what's fair or the best interest of the taxpayer. So I think if you're going to clarify something, if we want to really clarify something, I think that would be a place to start, because right now it just seems arbitrary. The more things we put together in a bid, the less opportunity there is for a local preference, and the more we split them out, which I'm not saying that's not good either. The more we split them out, the greater chance there is.
Yeah.
So that, the 2% doesn't bother me. If you want to go a little higher, that's, we can talk about that. But I think what's kind of arbitrary is that absolute number.
Right. The 2% is a number that actually I worked up in conjunction with Chuck, because Chuck was asking about it, and so I was the one who came up with the 2%, and that applied to passenger vehicles. That was our kind of our threshold. If you passed 2%, you were on thin ice. If you crept over 2%, depending on the size of the transaction, would also depend. But as Steve says here, the larger your dollar value of a transaction goes, the opposite should occur in your percentage. If there's it's kind of a seesaw effect here, because a flat percentage on $1 million is $20,000. 2% on $10,000 is $200. So you've got to be careful about using fixed percentages, and that's why at the last meeting when I said something about how do you legislate this, because it becomes a matter of if you want your local vendor preference to be a viable tool that's actually going to be used, then how do you craft it that it gets broad-based application in your purchasing system, as opposed to throwing out a token that only the small types of bids will actually have a chance to qualify for, and largely become symbolic and not really meaningful, as if you're ultimately trying to get dollars out into the economy. So there's quite a few arms and legs to it when you start looking at it, and we did run the comparison of 6 different jurisdictions. We, as the county executive said, St. Louis County does not have a local vendor preference. City of St. Charles has a 3% preference up to with a $5,000 cap for city vendors, and a 2% preference for vendors in the county, still subject to that 5%, and they do bid vehicles out under that system. And I guess, Mike, on that one, so if we're buying 10 police
we
cars,
apply one $5,000 cap to the whole
to the
contract.
whole work, right? Yeah,
The
that
whole
would just make
contract?
sense.
Yeah, not per vehicle.
Right. City of St. Peters has a 5% preference for city up to $1,000, which gives you a $20,000 transaction limitation. But they do not bid vehicles. They buy vehicles off of the state bid list. And
They don't even bid them?
no. And I think part of the reason is because City of St. Peters has every car dealership in the world in it. So,
Yeah, but that would seem a reason to bid them.
yeah, well, and I'm not sure what the
O'Fallon's
methodology
kinda
is.
doing the same thing, though. They buy them off state
Who
contract,
does?
too. O'Fallon.
Yeah.
So did St. Charles did also, but we actually did both. We buy them off.
Yeah.
We would look at the state contract, but we'd also bid it and give our guys a chance to try to beat the state.
Years
That's
ago.
exactly what we talked about, okay? I brought up, pardon me for interrupting, but you hit it right on the nose, okay? I brought up to Joanne, okay, and I asked her specifically this: can we ask local dealers to price match non-local low bidders? That's basically what you're doing. And the discussion was maybe we could, but it wasn't, destroyed the process or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, apparently it works okay in St. Charles's case.
No, that's not.
That isn't how they handle it in St. Charles, though.
The state
You
bid.
guys give them a chance to beat the state bid,
Right.
but everybody knows what the state bid is.
State
It's only
bid is
awarded
published
once a year.
before the
It's
bid goes
published.
out.
Yeah, we used to buy all of ours under state contract, too.
Yeah, we
But
buy.
the vendors have a chance to undercut the state
Right.
bid.
Right. You can't put it out for bid and have somebody, say, in St. Louis County that comes in at the low bid. You can't then go back out to your local guys and say,
Right.
okay, Don Brown Chevrolet came in at this, can you guys meet it or beat it? Because then you're just compromising the whole
No,
purchasing.
we didn't do
process.
that. We just went to the state.
But the state bid is
Everybody knew what the
published,
state
right,
bid was.
Right, it's published and it's out there ahead of time, and most vendors will know that the state bid is, whether a state bid addresses the type of vehicle that's being advertised for. Not all vehicles are on that state bid list. So if it is on the list, they know that somebody could come in with that number, and as the one lady told us that she couldn't figure out how Mockins was running the price that they were, but
I can tell you why. Because the more units you move, the more
these high volume,
the more you're guaranteed for the next year.
Well, the other thing that I was told, I don't know if it's true or not, but that the Ford people will basically do the same thing for you as they do for Mockins. But the only way it works is if you're in the center of the state. So in other words, because they're in the center because they have to deliver the cars, and since they're in the center of the state, they can, somebody in St. Louis obviously has got to drive a car 4 hours to get to Kansas City. It's not going to be able to compete with somebody who's in Columbia. It can kind of.
Nancy, sure.
I've been waiting.
I know.
Okay. I have been a proponent of shopping locally for a long time. I mean, articles in the newsletter, the news thing we did with Sondrager. But asking people to buy locally is different from forcing them. I mean, you're using government funds and you're forcing your taxpayers to spend more money to buy locally if you're making the decision. It's not our dollars, it's their dollars. And I think it needs to be a competitive marketplace with an eye toward local, looking for local people to bid. And it's on our consent agenda that we can look at each one and we can determine if judgment is being used properly. We've got a great purchasing department and a great finance director, and we see the large ticket items. I hate to go too far down the road of putting it in writing. I don't think St. Louis City and County already thinks of us as being, protective area, and we're going to give a preference to our people over theirs when they don't. I don't think it's right. Are we going to give a preference to women-owned businesses? Are we going to give a preference to minority-owned businesses? I mean, where do you draw the line? It's a free marketplace. That's my opinion. I mean, I do believe in buying locally. I just don't believe in making our taxpayers spend more for something than they can.
I just wanted to give you a couple last items here. The City of O'Fallon, as Director of Administration said, old habits are hard to break.
He called
So,
the county councilor.
County councilor, I got that about half hour.
I've heard that old habits are hard to break.
Yeah, so...
kind of old dogs and new tricks.
But the City of O'Fallon purchases off the state contract as well, except that if they need a trash truck or something like that, that's more specialized. City of Wentzville has a point system that they actually score bids, and I spent about 35 minutes on the phone last week with Jerry Hillen, who's probably going to watch this broadcast. He said, "Hey, do you guys record those?" So he's interested in this because they're still looking at their policy, and they're talking about enhancing their policy a little bit more, making some changes. But Kurt spent about an hour with them on the phone, and I spent about 35 minutes on the phone to get my arms kind of around it. And they actually have a point system, depending on a different point system for supplies and equipment versus services. And they score the bids with varying amounts for giving consideration to price, and then expertise, and then their locality, and if they put this points award together, and then the award is recommended to their board. If the amount is over $25,000, like it is here, it goes to the board, and the board then has the option of agreeing with it or going to the low bid. And it's so you go through all this work and say, okay, here's our local vendor preference recommendation, and they say, that's too much. No, I don't want to use that. And then you go back to the low bid. So again, as it would be here on a consent agenda item, the governing body has the end say so. But in the end, it is that lowest and best mentality. Does the dollar differential make sense to the transaction that's before the governing body? And so in the end, in fact, Mr. Hillen was telling me that they just had a situation where the recommended bid was $30,000 higher than the low bid, and their aldermanic board got it and went back to the low bidder. So, you know, in the end, their process works, and it says, okay, this one doesn't work for us. But we generally do some of that work ahead of time, and you all see the bids, you all see the prices of the bids, and, you know, we're certainly accountable to answer to our decision. But by the time the decision gets to you, it's come from my office, it's gone through the county executive's office, and then on the consent agenda. So it's a pretty thorough process in the end that we follow. The last one that I wanted to mention was on Jackson County. We made a call today to Jackson County as well, and they do not have a local vendor preference either. So they use a local vendor basically as a tiebreaker. Anyway, we got that's the rundown of the 6 jurisdictions around here, and St. Peter's has the percentage on a very, very restricted basis, and St. Charles, of course, has the one that's probably is the most liberal from the standpoint of what's in practice right now.
Something, I guess, that I ran into from the beginning of this first discussion with Mr. Gross a couple of years, probably pushing 2 years ago. I like to read these bids, and you folks know that. I look at them all every meeting, but typically we get them on a Friday before a Monday meeting, okay? And there's not much time to look at them. And I thank Donna and Carol because they know my interest in that, so when they come in the office now, they forward them to me. And that's a big help because I can start reading them ahead of time. If you look back 6 months or a year ago on a lot of the bids, especially construction bids, there'd be all these companies I'd never heard of, and there was no place where they were from. And then you'd start seeing Mr. Gross was starting to write in the names of the towns. I think it'd be really helpful if we knew that going into the bids where those people are from. Some are, some aren't. It just depends. But either way, you can look at it.
I thought on all our bids we do that. Chuck asked for that about 6 or 9 months ago. That we start putting the vendor location on the bid. So if you're not seeing it, then let us know, and even your level, because Chuck had said they haven't put that in practice quite well.
That would be helpful. I can tell you some have it and some don't. I read it pretty thoroughly.
If you're looking back in the early part of last year, that would be true, because Chuck put that into place last year.
I mean, we can look at last week's or 2 weeks ago too. The other thing I think would be also helpful is maybe on your form where you're sending out to your bids. Okay, does your company have a facility in St. Charles County? For instance, I wouldn't have raised Cain about the dump trucks had I know that company had a dealership in this county. But when I looked at the bid, it said Troy, Illinois. Okay. Additionally, I think it'd be helpful to know, like for instance, the Ford Fusions, we have to still decide that tonight. It's 2.3% more to keep those in the county. That's 2.3. We're drawing at 2%. Does the 0.3 bring us over? It's $1,900 for 5 vehicles. Okay. And my question there is, what's the state bid on that? My friends, that'd be probably a white Ford Fusion. It's probably on the state bid too. Are these vehicles that you're buying that are on the state bid? Do you ever compare what the state bid price is versus what the bid price is, for instance, on something like the Fusions?
We do take a look at that, and
are we below the price of the state bid or higher? Or?
Well, that's typically why you see us bidding it out. We want to find that out. And let's see here. I have, Bob, I was going to hand out that sheet. Did it show that?
Not yet. Let's not worry about that. The award was going to Mockins. The low local bid was Marshall. $1,909 difference, $382 a vehicle. And there again, it's just, we're getting into multiple vehicles here. If it was one vehicle, I'd do it.
Is Mockins bid the state bid?
Mockins was
the
state bid for that vehicle.
Yeah, I mean, if we decided to bid that on, 4 separate bids, each one of them would have qualified because we put them together, it's over $1,000 and it's off the table.
Well, and like I said earlier, if you're talking about a $20,000, $25,000 bid, and we're at 2%, but as the dollar value goes up, and we're talking about $83,000 to $85,000 here, then you need to, if you're going to be dollar sensitive, then that percentage begins to drop as the dollar value of the transaction goes higher. So the 2% that's on the lower dollar transactions becomes 1.5 or whatever, you know, as your dollar value of the transaction increases.
But on the Fusions and Explorers, if we had a policy similar to City of St. Charles, those ones would go those would stay at St. Charles County.
They would, and those were the only 2 vehicles, I think, that satisfied the criteria. That was the sheet that Kurt was just referring to. We actually looked at the bids that were on the sheet, the 9 bids that were on the sheet last time. And the Fusions and the Explorers were the 2 that would have satisfied the St. Charles City policy. My hesitancy about that is that those 2 bids are about $4,500. You're paying almost $500 a car when you're looking at the 2 groups as a whole, and it's $4,500.
So how much would the local preference spend on those? Because the city of St. Charles still has that $5,000 cap.
Right. The price difference was $1,909 and $2,550. So it was under the $5,000 cap in both cases. So, you know, and they were 2 separate bids. So it's the 19 and the 2,500, which there's plenty of room in that $5,000. But then collectively, from the standpoint of you're buying 9 vehicles between these 2 types, and it's $4,500.
If we're using 2% and $1,000 now, is there anyone feels that should be 3% and $5,000 or 2.5 and $3,000?
Well, we're not using $1,000. That was.
Okay,
I've
just
never
going strictly
subscribed.
percentages then.
Yeah, I've generally
no maximum on the upper end.
I've just looked at the dollar amount, the dollar premium that you're paying in relation to the size of the transaction. Yeah.
Wait a minute.
Well,
I don't understand what you just said.
Yeah, I don't either, because
I think
Chuck
there's
left
some-
very clear instructions. It was 2% or a maximum of $1,000.
That's what I heard too.
Yeah.
Well,
I think that's what Joe's reacting to.
I never use that. I mean, if Chuck was using that
Oh,
as
no,
a barometer,
you always send them up lowest and best.
right? Well,
If there's ever been, I mean, we're the ones who apply the preference, not you.
right, yeah, that's very true. Well, we do
But
it.
that was Chuck's guideline, was 2% or 1,000.
I think that
I
was
still have
more.
the Post-it taped to the wall.
I know, but I think that.
Yeah.
That's how he left the
Yeah.
instruction. Here's my Post-it.
I don't
This is the
subscribe
rules.
to the. I don't subscribe to necessarily the $1,000.
Well, let me just say this, okay, before we go any further, just for the record. It's Bob's job, it's Joanne's job, it's Chuck's job to get everything we can for the least amount of money, okay? On the other hand, this isn't a political thing, it's a public policy thing. And you guys are here to set the public policy of the county. And obviously, I get a say in that too. So so the fact that we already have a local preference, we've already made that decision. The question is only, is it going to stay like it is? Is it going to change? Is it going to go away?
Would you consider going up a little on those, the cap and the percentage? Or is that something that you don't feel comfortable with, Mr. Allman?
I'm looking to you all.
As a-
Mike?
I think as a matter of public policy, we owe it to everyone to say what the policy is. And this, we've been talking about it for 20 or 30 minutes now, and I still don't know what our policy is. It is, Bob,
2%.
2%.
But that's not in the
But that's not.
ordinance, is
Wait
what
a
Council's
minute.
saying.
But that's no disrespect. That's what you're saying, but that's not what Bob's saying. And it's 2 different things, because Bob has said
Right.
multiple times it is based on it's a percentage when it's a low dollar amount, but then we can't apply that when it becomes a higher amount.
Well,
but I don't know where those.
Bob
where,
has nothing.
just
Bob
minute,
sends
sir.
us the lowest
Where
and best.
where those where those breakoff
we send you to
points are.
local we send you to local on occasion.
We apply
I think-
the policy about the 2% is
what
in
I've-
Steve's office.
What I have seen,
As
from-
you know, it's not in the ordinance.
what I've seen from you is a note that says, so-and-so may be eligible for local preference. And I've asked some.
You've turned a few back to us.
Yeah,
On
yeah.
top of what we forwarded to you.
But anyway,
Yeah.
that's not important.
Right.
The important thing is I want to try to be consistent, and with no, negligible. Who knows what that means? And I just didn't want to be accused of doing something one week for somebody else and then not doing it the next week. So we just kind of established our own guidelines.
Yeah.
And
Honestly,
we'll continue to do that unless you tell us differently.
I think the existing policy is fine for the just the process that it allows us to go through in scrutinizing the bids and determining whether or not local vendor preference on a case-by-case basis makes sense. If you go the other way and you start talking about percentages or dollar caps, then you're doing what I don't think you want to do, and that is, my suggestion to local vendors would be sharpen your pencil and give us the best bid. Those guys are in business just like anybody else, and I think that's the best way to go about it.
So, Bobby, you're a proponent of don't do a local preference at all?
No. When local vendor preference gives you the ability to keep something local and not paying anything for that transaction excessive over and above what you have low bid.
I believe that we need to define what excessive is, and coming up, and I think that's kind of this side of the table's our responsibility to determine what is appropriate, what is excessive or not.
Yeah.
And that's otherwise it is as the next executive or treasurer comes in, or finance director, it is subject to change, and I think that it's incumbent upon us to say what the policy is, of course, with the right going through the proper channels and making sure it passes by everybody and is ultimately agreed to. Otherwise, it's a little bit too subjective.
Correct me if I'm wrong. The only way that we can come up with, a higher amount or whatever, is to do it by ordinance. Is that what you're saying? Is that what you're asking?
No, you could recommend and Steve can make a decision, but if you want to mandate, you have to pass an ordinance.
Okay.
I think you need to decide if there's 4 of you that want to do something. That's great. Let me know. And if it's something we can just do by consensus, we can do it that way. Or if you have 5 of you, do whatever you want.
I would not. We tried that once already, didn't we? I'd rather work with you folks and try to figure out something, because we have inflation, $1,000 cap, maybe that's not enough. Then have that discussion and keep it ongoing. And see if we can come to some agreement. Maybe we don't have to address it with an ordinance. Maybe it just can be some changes to the numbers that I saw behind Chuck Gross's magic curtain. Okay, so.
Nice.
Good.
In my opinion, I'd like to stay as close to the policy that we have now. But I mean, if you wanted to go 2.3% on this bid and recommend that one, is that where you want to go? You think?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the number on the Fusions is 2.3. The number on the Explorers is 2.5%.
Yeah.
And he's exact dead on the money. It's $4,459 to keep 9 vehicles in this county.
Well, both of them violate the $1,000 going back to the Chuck rule. So I know.
If we wanted to split the difference and make it $2,000 and 2.5%, then you take one and give the other one a little bit. It's compromise.
Just a second, Greg.
Just procedurally, I want to make sure everybody's on the same page, because we talked about a couple of different ways of doing this, but with the way our consent agenda is set up, this comes to you to either vote up or vote down. You cannot pick the low bid. You don't have the Wentzville option. If that was something as a council you wanted to have the ability to do, that would take an ordinance to implement.
Or for the county executive to pull it.
Or I could pull it and put it back.
Oh, absolutely. You might see the next one, the next meeting, but that would take the cooperation of the administration to do that.
We didn't want to do we chose not to do the election equipment on the consent agenda, because we wanted there to be a full and fair discussion, and we wanted to hear it before we put our.
Really appreciate that, Steve. Yeah, really appreciate that.
So,
Can I have that week back, please?
That's one area I really would like to talk about what goes on to consent, and what doesn't. And as one of the newbies on the board here, I was really shocked to see a $1.4 million contract come on the consent agenda, and there's literally 3 pages of information about it, and I'm looking around thinking, oh my gosh, they're asking me to vote on $1.5 million, the green light traffic.
all the traffic.
And again, just from the number of years I spent across the street, anything that was over, I think we had different tiers, but over 50,000 had to come forward as an ordinance. That number for county government may be too low, but 1.4 million seems like an awful lot to hand to a board on Friday afternoon and say we're voting on this on Monday.
Yeah, but I don't think anybody's ever wanted to table anything on the consent agenda to get more information. I don't know that that's ever been.
Yeah, you guys often table stuff for.
Yeah, and Mr. Cronin's been very good at that over the last 2 years. I'm seriously.
They have on St. Charles purchasing, and basically under 30 grand, the mayor says to say so. Over 30 grand, okay, it goes off the consent agenda, or it goes on the consent agenda, and over 100 grand, the council votes on it.
Right.
And I'm the same way coming from St. Paul, which our budget was a fraction of what the city of St. Charles is. We talked about, literally how many streetlights we were going to have the following year. So I mean, I do understand where you're coming from but I can say this: I sent Mr. Gross a lot of emails. Okay, got that information prior. He was real good about that. I've been trying not to bug Joanne as much because I know her plate's real full. Okay, but like for instance, on the parks one that's going to be brought back in tonight, we did discuss that pretty in full. Okay, so but I think that may be something if we do want to enumerate something. I don't know what the criteria are for consent agenda versus ordinance. I see it kind of different.
See, when I first came, I was not a big fan of the consent agenda. Because if you think about it, what the consent agenda means is I have to go first. And I got to say, yeah, this is okay with me. And then you guys decide whether, and I'm always thinking, man, what if I sign off on the consent agenda and 18 people come to the microphone that night and say what a bad deal it is. Well, I've already signed off on it. So, I don't know that we've ever sent you anything that controversial, because why should I? Why should I go ahead and, put my name on it without ever hearing from the public, and then it's totally up to you all. So, the consent agenda really is a way to speed up the process. And the person who's a little bit at risk is really me rather than you.
That's why nothing can go to the consent agenda unless it's pre-authorized by the county executive, because he loses his veto power.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different concept of a consent agenda than what you guys use in the cities.
Don?
I just want to point out that Councilmember Klinghammer and myself had a discussion prior to the meeting about that particular item. And I think more than anything, it was, as I suggested to him, that particular subject has been voted on by the council about 4 different times, by getting it on the thoroughfare plan, by the TIP, by all of hiring the consultant. So I think it was probably, and I think his point is very well taken, but I think as an example of why it was done that way, I think it's been before the council enough, and I apologize to both Mr. Klinghammer and Mr. Hammond, who probably haven't had a full briefing on that the way they probably should have had.
Well, let me add one final thing, and this was something I discussed with Councilman Cronin once before, is to try to encourage, just like we encourage people in St. Charles County to shop here. I think what we need to do is to try to encourage more of our vendors in St. Charles County to actively bid on things that we have available. And I know, we've discussed this before. Part of it is, I think we try to do a good job of getting the word out there. And part of it, obviously, if you're a businessman, is you need to know what's out there to bid on. But if we can in any way get more local vendors to bid, then I think the whole system works a whole lot better. And then we're going to be more competitive, and there's going to be more local vendors simply because there's more bids, and eventually there's going to be the more lower ones.
I think on that same note, when I first came on the council, I kept seeing bid after bid after bid for Mockins Ford, a few Pudmans, a few other Ford dealers. I happen to know Leo Marshall, who's got the dealership in my district. And I called Leo up. I said, hey, Leo, why don't you bid on these things, you know? And Leo said, they're aggravation. I never get them. It always goes to Mockins. I said, you know, I'm not interested in doing it. I said, Leo, please just bid because, you know, some of these you may end up getting down the road. And I was glad to see Leo has, every once in a while, does come through with a low bid now. So, yeah, I think passing the information out is a great idea because I think there's a lot of bidders think that way.
And I think the car dealerships, they know what's going on. They did make a decision not to bid. But, I mean, we buy a lot of cars and they're aware of what's going on. The problem is when you make these purchases that you maybe only make every 2 or 3 years. And then, you know, if you only buy, I don't know, you know, a furnace, you only buy a furnace, well, we do that quite often too.
An elevator.
An elevator, that's right. We're gonna put a new elevator here. That might be the only elevator we own. You know, so how many elevator companies are out there checking our website? So that's where we do need to do a better job of letting them know, hey, we know you're not watching this, but you know, we need a bid on an elevator here. And we probably won't need another one for 10 years, but you know, please take a look at it.
Well, that's on the specialty. I was surprised on the low-tech delivery of the voting machines. We still couldn't get people to bid on it. I think Kurt, you went and actually called people, and they still didn't bid. That to me is the surprising part.
The incumbent was Clemmy's Backhoe Service. And I had personally called Clemmy's to inform him that this bid was being sent out, and I noticed that he did not have an email address, and I asked him for a fax number that I could fax it to him. And he informed me that he did not have a fax, he did not have an email, so he couldn't even go to our website to download it, so I physically mailed him a copy of the bid and called to verify if he got it, and he did say that he did receive it. He just did not bid on it for whatever reason.
I have a question about that. The low bidder on that one is an LLC, which I know enough about law to know that's a limited liability company. That company's going to have $1 million worth of voting machines, okay? They're also probably going to have some keys to some secured facilities. Do they have adequate insurance policies and bonding to cover that? Are you aware of it? Do they require that as part of the bid?
Yes, we do require that as part of the bid, and Mr. Krismer has vetted them out to make sure that, you know, they were going to meet compliance with all of that.
Okay, and then he gives you that information?
He called and let me know that he was satisfied with Traction Masters for that service.
Okay, but they do have a bond in place, insurance in place?
We did not require a bond for that.
Okay.
They will be required to submit a copy of their certificate of liability insurance, which covers auto, accidental death, things of that nature. I would have to double check that.
Because, you know, what happens if some of those machines, let's say, for instance, he hauls them on pickup trucks instead of vans, and we get a rainstorm, and we got $1 million worth of new machines. I'm just asking as devil's advocate.
And Mr. Noonan looks over all that stuff, and I will check for sure to make sure, but yes, my memory is that all the insurances were in place on this.
An LLC is really more of a tax issue than it is a liability issue. It's more of a pass-through entity for taxes than it is all corporations have limited liability without insurance or bonding.
When Phil Ohms, Judge Ohms now, is a friend of mine, was telling me one of the things he learned in law school was about the taxi cab driver in New York City that had 49 taxis. And he set up 49 limited liabilities so that if one of his drivers was at fault in an accident, he'd lose one car and not all 49. And I remember that. Phil told me that.
They could have done it with 49 corporations too.
And was it True Value or True what? On the Arena.
Oh.
No.
That was a limited liability company too. When they went bankrupt, there was nothing for us to do.
It was Fame.
Take it over.
Fame. It was
Oh, yeah, okay. I
Family
know what you're
Arena
talking about.
Management Associates.
True manufacturing.
Arena Management Associates.
Family Arena Management Enterprises, pardon me. Fame.
Oh, that's
Bellied
right,
up.
Fame, yeah.
They
All right.
bellied up.
Is there anything else?
I've got something that's a little bit related to tonight's meeting, if we can talk about it a minute.
We'll give you about 5 minutes here. so
Okay,
we
you
get a
got
chance to
5.
put
This
them on.
is a fast idea, but it's something I want to think about. The EDC sent out that, I put copies of it, put everybody's desk, about how our revenue comes in. And for instance, City of St. Charles, 21% of their revenue is sales tax, where the county is 60%, okay? So this county is really dependent on sales tax, okay? And for the new members of the council, John White did a really good job of pitching, possibly raising the property tax to raise a little revenue in this county with packages of peanuts, okay? And I was teasing Terry tonight about having a peanut discussion. And what John did is he brought us all packs of peanuts and showed us that was approximately what you were paying in county taxes, property taxes, on your property tax bill, okay? But in this environment, I don't think anybody's got an idea, has any political suicide to probably say, we're going to raise your property tax a month because the county needs the money, because sales tax revenue may be holding, or with retail trends the way they are, that may start falling. So I had an idea I wanted to throw at you folks a little bit and see. I'm not a big fan of sales taxes because I think they're regressive, meaning that poor people pay a larger percentage of their income on taxes for groceries and the like than people that are wealthy or businesses. But I was looking at how the sales taxes broke down, and the state general sales tax is 3%, but has an exemption for qualified food purchases. So when you're buying legitimate groceries at a grocery store, you're not paying that 3% state sales tax. However, the county sales tax does apply to food purchases. And my thinking was, there's something to think about, and I'd like to scrunch the numbers a little bit, but what if we raise that property tax, okay, a slight amount like John proposed, okay, and then eliminated the sales tax for qualified food purchases like the state of Missouri did, okay? In other words, yes, we're going to charge you an extra pack of peanuts, but maybe we don't make your peanuts taxable when you buy them for your kids at the grocery store. It's an interesting combination. It might be a way to raise the property taxes without impacting a family in this county, because what you'd have to take a look at is how much would their property tax go up and what would they have to save on their food bill. But I think it might...
Make it revenue neutral.
I think you could actually make it revenue positive for the county, because businesses like mine, okay, and I'm gonna cringe when I say this, or people that have some farmland like I do, okay, we're getting pretty much a free ride on the county. I buy very little property, very little stuff that's sales taxable for my business. I mean, everything I buy from my farm is tax exempt, okay, and I'm paying you guys packages of peanuts for property tax. So yes, I'm going to pay more for that in property tax, and I think every farmer and every small businessman would. But I think if we made it small enough where the guy said, well, you know, I only paid $10 last year on my business in property tax to the county. Under this new proposal, it's going to 35 or 50 or whatever. I think a lot of businesses have been knowing that they've been getting a free ride, since most of our revenue is based on sales tax, might think, hey, that's okay. We understand the situation the county's in. And I'm not saying that this is something we ought to do. I'm just wanting to know from you all if you think that's an idea that's worth exploring, because you'd have to scrunch a lot of numbers to make it work.
Yes.
I don't believe it works that way, Bob. I believe that every jurisdiction that has levies a sales tax is applied to the same sales across the board.
I was just going to
Now,
say
now
that.
if you go, I'll tell you where I saw it, where I found this at, and if you go to Fallon's website, okay, on the 3% sales tax, the general sales tax of the state, okay, right? There's non-qualified food, there's qualified food purchases that are exempt.
But that's a Missouri statute.
I understand that, okay? What I'm saying is, why couldn't we give those folks the same break, okay?
We do. That's the problem.
We do,
is
okay? Okay.
We're not, we have to be authorized by the state legislature for how we apply sales tax. And I was going to suggest to the chairman that you might want to have the county councilor look into that, because years ago, Councilman Bearden asked us to look into that. And at that point in time, there was no authority to pick and choose what you placed your sales tax on. You either had a sales tax or you didn't. And it was applied to those things allowed by Missouri statute for it to be applied to. That may have changed. That was a lot of years ago.
With the state being able to, and we're talking about qualified food, we're not talking about.
No, I know what you mean, but that statute's written so that it only applied to them initially. I don't know what they've done.
Yeah.
Just
to it.
because they did it doesn't mean we can now do it unless they at the same time did it for themselves. Said, and oh, by the way, counties and cities can give the same rate.
Because I know, you were on the council too, Carl was very interested, and I think you were too, in trying to reduce it on foodstuffs at the time.
Right.
And that was
That's when the
before
state did it,
Missouri.
I think.
It was the year that Missouri was looking at it the first time, and I think they
Right.
did it the next year.
But the arch tax we were talking about a couple of months ago was supposed to exclude groceries and that
Yeah,
sort of
it's-
thing.
Because that's how the state statute's written.
Okay.
When they wrote the statute, I guess.
But that was a
Joanne, are you
local
saying
tax. How would
that
that
it
be
is
different
not
than
applied
ours?
across the board? I don't believe that's the case. And there, by the way, there are dozens,
It's a difference.
literally dozens of exclusions on sales tax. Certain lighting fixtures are excluded. If you buy your appliance,
But it's all in the state statute, the authorizing statute.
right, but what I'm saying is, if it's exempted by state, it's exempted by all the other jurisdictions that levy a sales tax.
I don't know that
I'm not
that's
so
true.
sure.
Absolutely.
If that was the case, then Deerbergs wouldn't charge any sales tax when you go to Deerbergs or IGA. And I'll have to look at my receipt again, but I'm pretty sure there's sales
That's
tax
the way I
listed on
remember
it.
it. And just a bit of history here. You know who was the first person to file a bill doing away with the sales tax on groceries? Our own Rich Crisper.
I think it's
He didn't get it
interesting
passed. I mean,
Yeah.
somebody
But
else
it's
passed
Madison,
it
too.
later, but Rich
You
is.
know, the idea is that the average family, what we would raise their property tax, they would get back in terms of not paying sales tax on their groceries. But places like the General Motors plant and Ameristar and a lot of the large landholders and stuff, they'd be paying a little bit more in property taxes. I think by scrunching the numbers, you might be able to make it revenue positive and still get the support of the people, because the people that are out there raising a family, sure, if they pay $50 or $100 more on their property tax to the county, as long as they can see that they're getting that much in savings on the sales tax for their food, it could balance out and have popular support as well. If it makes any sense.
But I think something that we need to at least look into. You would have to prove to me that it would be revenue positive, though. I wouldn't want to go through all this and
Yeah,
end up.
start somewhere.
It will impact personal property tax too on people's vehicles as well.
Well, can we get a memo on the law?
Yeah.
And maybe just a brief number crunch,
Yeah.
whether it's
It's
just enough
actually-
that we could decide whether we want to keep looking into it more.
Yeah.
It's actually pretty easy to calculate because we know what our assessed valuation is, and that number's already been set. So we can forecast.
And you know what the maximum we can impose on property tax too, right?
Yeah, in fact, it's that maximum reset this year.
Because the
So-
rollback.
Yeah,
is-
we have the sales tax rollback and we have the voluntary rollback. Because of the new reassessment numbers this year, our ceiling calculation
And
kind of resets
Councilman
again.
Cronin, you're asking if we applied, if the state statutory rule of dividing food into two different categories applied to our sales tax as well in the exact same proportion,
Right.
what
And I
would we
guess-
lose in sales
Now, the
tax?
question would be, is those grocery stores are reporting how much is qualified, not
Right,
qualified to the
sure.
state. So Bob would need access to those numbers if you don't have them already, Bob.
We
Okay.
have
And if we did it exactly the way the state of Missouri did it, it would be no extra burden on the businesses because they're already having to break out qualified to non-qualified for the state.
I just wanted to make sure we were
Right.
answering the right question.
But I think a little closer examination of numbers might be interesting.
We have the numbers, we just can't tell you what they are.
Okay. Okay, we have to wrap this up here because we have to
Okay.
do some.
Just one clarification. When I made that demonstration with peanuts, it was a demonstration. It wasn't a proposal.
Very well said. Very well said.
Do you know it's the